Good evening. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. So tonight we're asking a very practical question. Can Australia compete in the global AI race? And what does winning actually look like from here? There seems to be two common takes on this topic. So one that says in Australia the funding gap is too great and the market is too small and slow. And on the other side, it says that Australian founders have a unique advantage and they can scale globally from here. This session brings together the people building and investing in AI in Australia. And tonight we're going to get under the hood and have a look at what's working, what isn't, and what needs to change. So tonight we'll start by setting the scene with an investor view. We're going to hear from three founders operating in very different AI frontiers. So it's fraud prevention, agent-based automation, and health AI, before opening up to a panel discussion and some Q&A. But I've just been told that the bar's going to close at 6:30. If we do Q&A, you probably won't have the bar. So at 6:20, I'm going to leave it for you to decide whether you want bar or Q&A. So just think about that. All right, to join us for the session, we've got four fantastic guests. We've got Silk Kadala, who is a principal at Blackbird, which is, I'm sure everyone knows, one of Australia's leading VCs. We've got Jackie Koh, who's a co-founder and co-CEO of Relevance AI. We've got Peter Eckermann, co-founder and chief operating officer from Aparte AI, like the other companies, and Dr. Ariella Hefferman-Marks, got it, CEO and founder of Ovum AI. So welcome, guys. Thank you. All right. So I'm just going to dive in. So to get this started, I'd like to speak to Silk, who is an investor, has worked closely with companies such as Heidi Health and Harrison AI, which are very high-profile health and AI companies. So from where you sit, what are you seeing in the AI space in Australia right now?
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm just going to say I'm using a few notes tonight because this is something we think a lot about at Blackbird, and I wanted to make sure that everything I say is somewhat underwritten by statistics or examples in the portfolio, and so I'll be referring to my notes just a touch. So to start off, in terms of what we see across the landscape, I think it's really important to shine a light on what we're doing well, what we're achieving in Australia. We're leading really across the AI stack, and I think for the most part culturally we don't give ourselves quite enough credit for it. So I'm going to try to give you some of the examples and statistics around it that we've been looking at quite closely and how they're trending. So let's start on talent. Some great stats that I pulled out in the last week were we account for about 10% of all working AI experts in the APAC region, even though we're less than 1% of that region's population. That puts us second to China and ahead of really big populations like South Korea and India. It's an incredible ratio of talent size, and that depth is powering the whole ecosystem. Again, another example is we've got 6 universities ranked in the global top 100 for AI research. We're producing AI PhDs per capita more than any other country. And so we're building this compounding pipeline of talent that's really feeding these startups. And that's showing up in the investment stats as well. So a couple of examples there. We've got in the first quarter of this year, 62% of all Australian startups that raised capital were AI focused, and that totaled around $1 billion in capital. AI roles were up 500% year on year, and for the first time ever, it's an analogy that a few partners at our fund like to use. There are more software engineers in Australia than plumbers and hairdressers combined. The velocity is really unlike anything we've seen before. I want to move to the portfolio, some examples across the portfolio that are worth shining a light on. So AI-first companies are scaling 5 times faster than traditional SaaS businesses. So practically, revenue is being pulled forward. We're getting commercial quicker. We're building quicker. We've got a great example, Heidi Health, which we mentioned, an AI scribe for doctors. They went from 0 to 21 mil USD, so roughly 27 or so AUD in 18 months, and are the fastest growing company we've ever backed. Then there's Leonardo AI, which a lot of you might have heard of already, which got acquired by Canva. They hit 20 mil ARR AUD in the first 12 months, and they trained 2 foundational models right here in Australia. Their models are ranked number 5 and number 8 on global leaderboards, and they've built a user base of more than 15 million people worldwide. 90% of the revenue is coming from outside Australia. So I'm rattling off stats because it's important, and I'm trying to really kind of advocate for the shining light that we should be thinking about when it comes to the Australian ecosystem. I've got 4 or 5 more examples, but I'll focus on maybe 1 or 2. We've got Lorikeet. They're building AI for customer support in complex industries like finance and healthcare. They doubled their valuation in 6 months and are after landing major enterprise customers in the US. And these are head-to-head bake-offs with the likes of Decagon. So I think the important takeaway here is that all of this is happening without the kind of capital or compute access that the US and China have. And we're building global AI companies with a fraction of the resources. And even though seed valuations here are roughly 25% or so lower than the US, our companies are producing bigger results. So internally, we coin this phenomenon as a return on creativity advantage. We're world leaders in getting the most out of every dollar and every line of code. So from where I sit, to answer the question directly, Australia isn't playing catch-up. We're playing our own game, and we're playing it incredibly well, I'd say.
And so what kind of AI companies are being built or started in Australia? Is there any particular areas where we've got strong momentum?
Definitely. So I've given you a few examples of specific companies, but we also think about sort of rivers of momentum at Blackbird. And there are 4. As you can probably tell, I quite like frameworks and sort of like thinking about things in heuristics. I'll touch on the 4 briefly, as they are relevant to also the spaces where a lot of the founders on this panel are building. The first is vertical AI. So this is practically AI co-pilots that are built for a specific profession. The most obvious example we talked about, Heidi Health, so helping doctors with patient notes. But it's happening across a lot of fields. We've backed Hearth, AI for architects, Camia, AI for chemists, and Marlu, AI for financial planners, quite recently. So each one is turning what used to be clunky, slow, 10% productivity software into something that's intuitive and delightful and delivers maybe 50, 60, 90% productivity gains. The second river that we're looking at very closely is hardware and AI. This is where our engineering DNA in Australia really gives us an edge. Halter being a great example. They make solar-powered smart collars for cows. Their tagline, if I remember correctly at the very beginning, was mind control for cows, which I absolutely loved. And that's playing out in true fashion. The farmers can literally fence and herd their cattle from an app, and that app is powered by real-time data from those collars. They hit $1 billion valuation recently, so they hit sort of that unicorn status, and it's just one of many examples combining sort of the hardware moat that we see with AI value. The third river of momentum, that we've seen is ML scaffolding. So these are tools that practically help others build and scale AI. They're the plumbing and infrastructure layer. A great example is Unsloth. They sit quite squarely in this definition. They help engineers fine-tune open source models 30 times faster. And they were actually founded by 2 20-year-olds straight out of university. So it's really showcasing the talent that we have here, not just at sort of the logo level, but certainly out of universities, the very young stages. The fourth river and final one is specialized models. So we're seeing the world move away from this one model will rule them all to thousands of smaller purpose-built models. Springboards is doing this for marketing agencies, a team of ex-Google ML PhDs who've built their own in-house research team and trained specialized models that outperform general purpose ones on specific creative tasks. And just to underscore this point, every company that released a foundational model in Australia, well, almost every company, we've got Leonardo, Harrison, Canva, Springboards, Marco as well. They all sit in the Blackbird portfolio, and so that gives us a really privileged position to see that the proof is in the pudding when it comes to building at that infrastructure layer here from Australia, but on a global scale. And last thing I'll say on this point is it's not luck. It's because Australia has quietly become one of the best places in the world to build applied AI.
Excellent, thank you. Thanks for setting the scene. So let's sort of talk to the people now that are building it. So first, Pete Eckerman from Aparte AI. So you're taking on one of the world's biggest global challenges, which is scams and fraud. Do you want to give us a snapshot of what Aparte AI is doing and what you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Amanda. So Aparte's mission is to break the business model of scammers globally. So what we do is we engage at scale with scammers on voice, text, WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, RCS messaging, just about every place where scam exists. And so what we do is our bots will go out there, find scammers, or we'll take scam calls. On a typical deployment, we'll take 30,000 scam calls a day. We'll sit there and waste the time of the scammers. So we'll scam bait at an industrial scale. But it's not just about wasting their time. It's about extracting every piece of intelligence that we can from the scammers. And the idea is that whilst we're wasting their time, we're reducing their impact that they're going to have on individual consumers and communities. So, we're soaking the capacity of the call centres that are attacking Australia and other countries. But all that intelligence means that we can actively disrupt then scam. So the sort of intelligence that our bots collect, for instance, on voice when we're deployed with a telco, as things like the tactics, the scripts, even some of the device fingerprinting and the metadata we can pull from each call that we're receiving from a scammer. And so all that then gets piped in real time to our partners so they can inform their customers, and we can share with law enforcement and others around how we can stop these scammers and really reduce that impact. On WhatsApp and Telegram and some of the other channels that we operate in, it's a little bit more focused. We go out on specific missions to go and find, where this scam's propagating, and go and find things like bank accounts of scammers, go and find things like, their email addresses, phone numbers. We take that intelligence, we enrich it, we validate that using our AI models, and effectively build these complete pictures of where scam network exists, so we can shut them down really at their source and protect people from scammers.
Would it have been possible to do any of that without AI?
Not at this scale, absolutely not. So some of our clients that we work with have disruption teams, and some of the banks we work with overseas will have 10 people who have 20 phones each, and they'll try and do what we do. So we've immediately went to be able to scale and go times 100, times 1,000 on the level of disruption and in scam intelligence that they're picking up.
And for an early stage startup, I remember when we first met, and you were telling me, Peter was saying one of the first clients they got was CBA, which is a pretty good client to get as an early stage startup. Do you want to talk a little bit? I think it's interesting to talk about how you actually got that client and just some of the work quickly that you're doing with CBA.
Yeah, look, so CBA was our first client, and that came about. We were out of Macquarie University, so this started as a research project that was funded by the Office of National Intelligence. One of the executives in their fraud space was an alumni of Macquarie, reached out, worked out what we were doing, and from there we've been working with CBA for about 2 years. And so a lot of the engagement with CBA, I think we've been absolutely blessed as a startup to have their input into designing our product, but also their ethos, which has really, really helped us shape something which can help not just CBA, but every bank in Australia and really any bank overseas. So they've been incredibly important as a partner for us.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, from scams to automation. So Relevance AI is working on agent-based systems that could change the way that businesses operate. So if we dig into what that actually means, can you explain for everyone in the audience, what does agent-based automation mean?
Sure. So agent-based automation means essentially a lot of the automation is not like if this then that. It's actually powered by natural language, and you're essentially giving agents a lot of the autonomy in terms of decision making and actually completing that task. And it actually also comes back to like what we do here at Relevance a lot. In fact, we're actually trying to move away from the word automation a little bit as well. But what we're doing here at Relevance is we're building the home of the AI workforce. What that is, it's an agent building platform designed for essentially knowledge workers and domain experts to essentially build AI agents that can replicate and clone the ability for them to do that exact piece of work. So a lot of what kind of goes into agentic automation is actually about how can I create an agent that is actually able to replicate this exact work rather than like, hey, this is like some sort of background automation, et cetera. So you got to think about things like, how do you kind of collaborate with this agent? How do you actually delegate work to this agent? Whether it's via WhatsApp, whether it's via Slack, whether it's via, voice, et cetera. So, thanks to that, we've been privileged to work with some of the largest digital native companies in the world, companies like Databricks, Canva, Uber, Monday.com, and we're scaling really fast with a lot of those digital natives as well.
First question, why are you moving away from the word automation? And second question would be, can you just sort of give some examples of how customers are using the platform so they can understand the impact that you have?
Yeah, so it's because automation feels less, I guess, collaborative and personal. And we're starting to see a lot of the really strong usage of our platform be almost pretty much how you would essentially work with a person. Like, you're jumping on Slack. We have, like, for example, just recently deployed a graphics designer agent that really took off in one of our customers. And that was a very they were really using it from hey, I'm going to just ping this agent as if it's like another like coworker. And that's where we see the future. We see that what we're trying to do is that we're actually trying to essentially replicate how can we make your workforce a lot more, not just humans, but AI as well, and make that collaboration really, really seamless. Because we're starting to see that really happen more and more, and that's why we wanted to move away from the word automation, because automation feels a bit too in the background. You're not really working with it. But when it comes to like an AI workforce, that's a lot more collaborative. In fact, we've actually started to see like use cases where people are humans and AI are collaborating even on the same thread. So we recently. This was actually internal, but one of the use cases we internally use for AI agents that you can build in our platform is video generation. For those who know about video generation, it's usually limited to like 5 to 8 seconds. But we actually had a Slack thread where different people were essentially commenting on this agent to tell it to generate different kind of clips of 5 to 8 second of that video. So then what ended up happening was the end video was this very collaborative piece of like video that was, by 10 different people's opinion on like what they wanted to see in the video. So that's like, an example of use case. But the most popular use cases are a lot to do with like go-to-market. So like automating like outbound cold calling. So for example, actually I can't talk too much about the work I do with KPMG, but like, for example, we work with another really large customer, and they utilize our AI agents to actually handle about, I think, 10,000 inbound calls every day to, be able to answer a lot of customer inquiries, but also help them upsell the product as well. So there's a lot of really, really interesting use cases like that. We've helped customers to actually be able to deploy SEO agents, specifically in education. It's with a company called Stride. I think they're like one of the largest education companies in America. And yeah, they're deploying agents that can automatically create these education contents that are great for SEO and AEO, et cetera. So yeah.
Excellent, thank you. One of the most important frontiers for AI is healthcare. So Ovum AI is tackling that space, and I'd love to start with a personal story behind why. So what pulled you into AI? Was it the problem or the technology?
It was the problem. We actually pivoted into AI a week before ChatGPT came out.
Good timing.
Yeah, really good timing. So I guess if we want to start the story at the very beginning, I was in my 3rd year of medical school and I began suffering with vestibular migraine. So for anyone that doesn't know what this is, constant dizziness, photophobic, so really sensitive to light. I was in the hospital setting. I was at lecture screens. I couldn't see lecture screens. I couldn't stand in clinical placements. And I was a very health literate young woman, and I really struggled to get the care that I needed. It took me 3 years to get any form of medication, whilst also trying to be a medical student. And I realised then, both as a patient and as a doctor, that our whole healthcare system was broken when it came to women's health. But at the same time, it was COVID, so I was going between regional, remote, metropolitan hospitals, primary care. I was in ward-based settings, and I realised it didn't matter how health literate a woman was, how educated, her kind of socioeconomic background. Women were disempowered with their healthcare regardless. And I began to look around me, and I realised it was due to 3 main things. So firstly, women were fearful of the healthcare system due to decades of being dismissed and marginalised and often gaslit. So going to social media or family and friends rather than their healthcare providers. And this was leading to lower health literacy and this rise in chronic health conditions. So in Australia, 56% of Australian women over 15 already have at least one chronic condition, and by 65, that's 87%. And we have a good healthcare system, like comparatively, globally. I did law science before medicine, and I had a focus in reproductive biology, which allowed me to see that the way we were approaching the women's health was really siloed and fragmented, despite our physiology being cyclical and interconnected. And we really need to be integrating women's health data. And then I began to learn about the research gap and the fact that women had not been equally represented in clinical trials for decades. And then I had that light bulb moment. Like, I remember sitting in my car, driving on my way to medical placement, and I thought, if we have a book that tracks children's development over time, why don't we do something like that for women's health and integrate women's health data, empower them through health literacy so they can advocate for themselves, which we know leads to better engagement in preventative health behaviours and improved health outcomes, and feed that back into research. And that was 3.5 years ago. And the first name I had was Ovum, and it stuck. And actually, at our launch event recently, we launched 8 weeks ago onto market. The venture studio I started with, Nakatomi, who've worked with me quite closely, they brought up the first ever email I sent to them with my idea. And you know what? It hasn't changed. The product has not changed other than bringing in AI. So the solution's the same, but AI has allowed us to do it better and more efficiently.
Do you want to talk a bit more about the actual product and what it does?
Yes. So first, I always like to ask before I talk about Ovum, who in the audience has heard of the gender health gap and knows what it is or why it's occurring? It's actually more than usual. I will say usually it's about 3 or 4 hands. And if I said it's costing our global economy $1 trillion annually, who's shocked by that? Yep. So why this is occurring is because women are spending 25% more time in poor health compared to men, mainly during their working years. That's 16 to 64. And they're dropping out of the workforce because of this. And this is having such a big impact that it's costing our global economy $1 trillion annually. Why is this occurring? It's due to systemic biases, interpersonal biases, and research biases that women are experiencing. And Ovum is the solution to all 3. In fact, the Gender Health Gap report actually says at the end of it, at a global scale, the solution to this is AI, unbiased data sets, and interoperable medical records. And if you hear what Ovum's doing, we're doing all of that. And that came a year after I came up with the solution, which is great. So Ovum is the first AI health partner for women. It allows women to integrate all of their health data across their lifespan so they can be empowered through health literacy and advocate for themselves in clinical appointments. But at the same time, we're collecting the largest women's health proprietary data set to feed back into addressing the biases, both within research and artificial intelligence. And so our mission is to transform every woman's experience of healthcare and to close the gender health gap. I like to use a case example because it's a completely new way of tracking, visualising and engaging in women's health. So if we take 45-year-old Isabel, who's going through perimenopause, often dealing with really individual symptoms, she's going to family and friends, social media, doctors, allied health, and not necessarily getting the support or the answers that she needs. But she can download Ovum and is met with this really personalised and compassionate onboarding experience where Ovum is getting to know her and her whole health journey. So she already feels more listened to and heard than she has in any clinical appointment. And what it's doing is beginning to create this longitudinal memory of her health provided with more personalised insights and advice over time. She can then integrate medical reports, wearable data, generalised symptom tracking, medication, appointment, health goal tracking, and all reproductive health. So that's cycle tracking, fertility, pregnancy, perimenopause, and menopause, all in one place. It consolidates that information and helps her to create a report which she can share with her provider to help her advocate for herself. And then she can choose to share that with research. So she doesn't need 7 apps anymore, she just needs 1. That's Ovum.
Fantastic, thank you. All right, now we're going to move to a bit of a panel discussion and to explore sort of the big question of whether Australia really can compete in the AI global race. And as someone, I'm not an AI expert, obviously, but someone who speaks to founders and VCs all the time, and I can say the views out there are really different. There's a lot of positives and negatives that you hear all the time, and so I'd really like to throw a few questions to the panel and explore that. Starting with applications versus frontier models. So Australia isn't building large language models at scale like the US or China. Does this mean our role is limited to software application, or could focusing there actually be our competitive advantage? Anyone?
I feel like I had this conversation recently with someone. So at the moment, Silk here also mentioned a few stats in terms of like frontier, I guess not like, extremely large language models like OpenAI, et cetera, but there has been like, smaller but still large models being produced in Australia. I do think it's a bit more on we got to think like first principles, like what does it take for us to actually have a competitive advantage to do it. One of it is probably what's core to data centers, et cetera, energy, proximity to the chips as well, like where are the chips being produced, How can we ship them quicker to Australia, etc. I think when a lot of those things are in place, we'll start to see more and more like models being produced in Australia. One of the interesting trends that we're also, I think this is just general observation, but one of the interesting trends I'm also starting to see in terms of like, very large language models being produced, it's starting to become a bit of a national kind of, I guess, agenda. If you look at like, for example, EU, they're investing into like Mistral, and then they're also investing into SMP and like OpenAI. US, obviously, they're investing into Anthropic and OpenAI. China's investing into their local like large models as well. So, I do see Australia eventually doing that as well, but it probably does require, first of all, the infrastructure to have that competitive advantage. We should have a lot of those competitive advantage. We're, geographically, we have large amounts of land that can be great for data centers, and we also have weather conditions that also actually, help data centers as well. Like what's kind of missing is maybe like, hardware expertise, but not really, because if you look at like NextDC, et cetera, like there already is very large like data infrastructure being provided. So yeah, I very much think we can do it. In fact, I think we should do it because a lot of the top like Australian frontier model trainers are actually Australian. Like for example, Andrew Tulloch is Australian, and he does just news, I think, like a couple of days ago, where he moved from Thinking Machine Labs to Meta on like a $5 billion like salary or something like that. Not salary, I think it's across 6 years, but there is talent there. Like for example, Anthropic, their head of RL is Australian called Shoto. The Meta, used to be head of infra for Anthropic. I forgot his name, but I should know. He's one of our investors. I forgot his name, but he's also Australian, and he just moved to Meta as well. So it's like there's actually a lot of like talent that are Australian that are actually working at these like OpenAI, et cetera. That if there was more of a national agenda, I think they would come back.
Right. Pete, do you want to comment on any of that?
Yeah, I think in terms of Australia, it's a question of infrastructure. I totally agree, Jackie. I think we've got the talent there, and certainly I'm probably biased coming from a university background, but the quality of the graduates that we're putting out and the research that's coming out of Australian universities when it comes to AI and its applications, I think is second to none. I think there's, and certainly the work that we do in government, there's also a push for really the sovereign capability to be built very, very rapidly within Australia. So I think the will's there. It's really just trying to catch up with the infrastructure and be able to create the rest of that environment to be able to do that at scale in Australia.
I think my perspective is that we can still be competitive and have like global impact even if we aren't doing that. I think if Australia is to focus on our strengths, it's really having a really supportive ecosystem that fosters innovation and nurtures these early stage AI companies, which Silk was touching on some of these stats around, companies that are not necessarily like Anthropic or like, for example, Ovum, where we're having significant impact being recognised overseas as attacking white space in a really innovative way that companies in the US and in China aren't doing, but we haven't created a completely new LLM. So I think, being in Australia has been an advantage for us because it's given us the space to really nurture this idea and build it and build a product that's now really globally competitive. So I do think there's a space for Australia to be nurturing other types of AI companies that are not only as advanced as some of these other ones in US and China.
Can we talk about the funding gap? Because actually I was just reading our quarterly Venture Pulse report, and it was showing the large amounts of funding, that first round funding. It's just huge in the US. And then we see the funding, some of the funding rounds here for our AI companies. It's just so much smaller. And I suppose I just wonder how we're going to be able to compete. If AI is about speed, then how do we compete against a $100 million first round as whatever number, as opposed to a $2.5 million round or whatever? So how do you, as founders, think about that? And then Silk would be interesting after, as an investor, how do you think about that as well?
I mean, maybe I'll talk about it in different parts, but like, let's say, for example, if Australia does decide to do like LLM training and there is a lot of clear competitive advantage that can be demonstratable, I actually think US investors will pour in a ton of money, and we will see like $100 million first rounds. But I just don't think the conditions is just quite there yet. I think it's going to get there, and we might start to see more of it. And maybe it's more on the infra layer first. Like, you know, BlackRock, I think, acquired an XDC for like some number of billions of dollars. So we're already starting to see it happen. But yeah, in terms of like seed stage, et cetera, you know, the ecosystem does rely on like the Blackbirds, Airtree, Square Peg, et cetera. Now, why I will say the gap is quite largely, you know, there's a certain percentage, but quite largely kind of really skewed towards the frontier model trading that's happening, because that is a incredible amounts of like capital that you require, and there's a lot of like pre-assumption baked into it. Like, sure, it's like a $100 million round, but like realistically, that's almost like a prerequisite to do it. Like, if you don't have a $100 million round, like, forget about like, you know, trying to train like large language models to compete with the OpenAI, at least in like, you know, certain kind of iterations. So yeah, I will say as well, like, you know, if you, I think there is a lot of benefit as well in terms of like, one of the things that why Australia probably doesn't need as much capital is also because we're just a lot more kind of, I guess, frugal in terms of how we operate companies. Like, honestly, one of my big mistakes is actually being too frugal. Right now, I'm trying to reverse a little bit of that, or like I'm working with US investors, and they're like, dude, you guys haven't spent much, like, go spend. Like, think about this like 10x more. And yeah, it's, and because of that frugality, we tend to not actually need as much to like do some of these things. Usually it does mean a longer time horizon, but that's just one of, I guess, like the innate cultural traits as well.
So a few careers ago, I used to be a chartered accountant, and my CFO, my favourite CFO that I work for, a guy from BHP, he told me, you know, the best thing that you can do is have deep pockets and very short arms. And so that idea, like, we absolutely use that in our company. And I think that really gives us, you know, quite the edge. I think we will absolutely run into the problem that Jackie talks about. But for us, you know, we want to be hungry. We want to make sure that we make every dollar go absolutely as far as possible in what we're doing. And I think that creates, especially at our stage, a company with the right fundamentals around chasing that next piece of revenue, making sure that we're putting the right money, and also making sure that we're, you know, quite disciplined around, okay, if this isn't working, are we ready to pivot and change, you know, and stop, you know, that flow of resource going in that particular space. One other thing that I will mention as well, though, for a company of our stage, what we have found, though, is that the support in terms of Australian government has been very, very strong in picking up some of that funding gap. So a lot of our work, as I mentioned before, was initially funded with the Office of National Intelligence, but in terms of the investment by government at the moment through things like the Australian Economic Accelerator, that's really helped us go to market a lot more rapidly, you know, and be able to be hungry and get out there a lot quicker with the support of that funding, as well as obviously our VC funding too.
I do want to caveat some of that. Like, I think the Australian ecosystem has helped greatly, but one of the main ones is the main drivers of that is like the R&D tax incentive. I think pretty much everything besides that is, it just requires too much prerequisite to like understand. Like realistically speaking, like I remember when, you know, we first started, there was like you know, these people that, you know, work for government. It was like very innovation focused. You know, they say like, oh, there's this 200K grant, but you know, what do you need? What's the prerequisite? Oh, you need to submit this like 5-page long paper of like what you're doing and why is it like not, like, I will say it feels like it's not really targeted. It feels like it's more targeted to like seasoned entrepreneurs than like, you know, straight out of uni entrepreneurs. Regardless, though, I think it's a great, you know, kind of contribution to the system. But I do think like one of the things that I worry about some of those things is like the barrier to like just even submit is like way too like complex, and it's almost like they want. I mean, I just remember like I was having this person was really pitching me accelerating commercialization. I don't know if that's still a thing, and I remember one of the prerequisite is like you only should apply for this if you show enough proof that you really, really need this funding because no one else is willing to fund you. And I'm like, that's crazy. Like, why? Like, how am I going to go put just the amount of time for me to spend to go put together this evidence, and it's not actually true either. So it's like, well, that's really just a very specific kind, et cetera. So that's the only caveat I will add to that. But I think the R&D tax incentive, it's very recognized globally. Any US VC I've spoken to in the past, they're like, yeah, no, that's the game changer incentive, where it's like it does allow you to reduce your costs quite a lot. So yeah.
I think just from our perspective, a lot of what we've done is from that university and I suppose that academic space where there's very much that cycle of, a typical academic grant, you have a 20% strike rate on actually hitting something. So, for us, it's been part of our DNA to go and really push hard, but I totally agree. I've just finished writing an application which was 220 pages long. I mean, the funding's great, but it's a lot of effort for what it actually is at the end of the day, though.
Yeah. There are people that can help you, like we can, anytime. Silk, from your side, around the funding piece, being an investor, how do you see that when we look at, as I said, US and foreign investment being so large compared to what we can invest?
Yeah, I'm big on the positive framing here, which is show examples of where companies are succeeding globally at a global scale and competing across specialized verticals, and they haven't received that kind of funding. So I mentioned some already, but obviously Heidi, we've got Springboards, we've got Lorikeet. These are all companies that have had smaller rounds and are competing in a space that have competitors that are very well funded, and yet the quality of product is incredibly high. And so I remember I wrote in my notes, because I was referencing back, and I bolded, constraint can be a competitive advantage. And I think of that as, it forces you to have extreme clarity, extreme creativity when it comes to building product. And as some of the panelists commented on, R&D tax incentive, the currency conversion in Australia as well compared to the US, you get to build practically, a team of double the size for half the cost, maybe not quite that much, but you certainly are able to build leanly here in Australia with extreme clarity and precision. And obviously, the proof's in the pudding. I'm not hypothesizing on is it possible. We have phenomenal companies that are doing that already. And I will say a part of the investor job as well is to enable companies to build as best they can in Australia, but build day one from a global perspective. So really localize their product. And a lot of companies building out in the US are very US centric, and so they capture a very big market, and they kind of underrate the opportunity of the international market. In Europe, there's big populations in Southeast Asia and Asia centrally. And so from Australia, we're thinking that way from day one. Our products are translated across multiple languages. Again, that's enabled by AI. And as investors, we think about, okay, can you scale globally from day one? And how do we get you into these bigger rounds? And how do we get great US investors into your Series A, Series B? And again, examples underwrite, that point. We have even non-AI companies too, like Eucalyptus had a lead from a US lead. Heidi recently had a US lead in their Series B. We have, a laundry list of these examples that are happening pretty continuously.
Yeah, and on that note, you've got a US VC. Do you want to talk, how did that come about? How long did that take? When in your journey did you actually raise?
So we have how many? Majority of our investors are global. So we have Insight Partners who did our seed round, and then Sequoia Asia, who was co-investing along with King River, who's actually the Australian VC that we work with. And then Series B was Bessemer Venture Partners. So I guess if you talk about the Crunchbase leaderboard, two of them are very high up there, which is Insight and Bessemer. What was the question? How did it come about?
Did they reach out to you? Were you reaching out to them? How did it all happen?
Yeah, so I think one thing to kind of highlight in terms of working with US investors is that they care about customer due diligence a lot. They care about the charts, et cetera, but they actually care about that a little bit more than the charts, unless the charts is clearly absolute exponential growth. And they really care about the customer due diligence being based, US-based companies as well. So how did it come about? Our first round, which was Insight Partners, came about from a warm connection with our, with one of our angel investors. And it really happened because our first customer had also just recently raised from Insight Partners, and that was like a $100 million round or something. So we were actually a part of their pitch deck. So because of that, it just went really, really smoothly. We made a lot of mistakes. We didn't even really negotiate the term sheet because they, in very American fashion, we were like, okay, we want 2 million. They said, how about I give you 3? And we realized we probably should have said, okay, give us 4. And that's a mistake I've learned in the past. So that was like our Series A. It just kind of came from that. We weren't even really actively raising. It just kind of happened. Series A was when we kind of did the fundraise piece. So there was a lot of lessons learned there. But ultimately, we were very much actually looking for 2 parts. One, a kind of a Australian slash US VC, meaning one that knows the nuances between the two. And then 2, a APAC, so like SEA investors. So we were able to get both of those. But that was much more of a fundraising process because we were going through a pivot. So even just as part of fundraising, we were figuring out what the hell to say, honestly. And with every pivot, you need to kind of talk about like why you're doing this. It felt much more like a proper fundraise process, and I think it felt like almost like a seed fundraise process because we had an existing business. We had to pivot away from that, and what does this new business look like? What is the traction? So that was that fundraising process. It was actually a really fun one because I think getting to do it, it just taught me a lot of lessons about like what I need to be able to pitch, etc. Now, unfortunately, even though that was so fun, the Series B, I didn't get to do the fundraise process because that was the most preempted round, meaning like I had only had like a meeting with Bessemer, and that was like, I think 6 months ago before the second meeting. And the second meeting, they just gave us a term sheet. So they're like, we did all the due diligence. We talked to all your customers without our permission. And they said, yeah, you guys, we want to invest in you guys. And then so after that, we just did negotiation back and forth. So honestly, I think the lesson here is like just focus on building your company. The investors will come. Like Blackbird. Sorry, I'm a bit jet lagged. I literally came off.
We've rebranded. It's official.
So sorry, but like investors will knock on your door. Especially good investors like Silk will definitely notice that, like, oh wow, you guys are building something amazing here. Can we just have a chat, etc. And you'll be surprised that if you do that, if you focus on your business, build it well, the investors that will inbound you are going to be global. Like even my inbox, just today is like 5 investors from the largest firms you can think of, like A16, Iconic, etc., trying to get a meeting. So it's like just focus on building the company, honestly.
That's fantastic. But Aurelia, you just came back from New York as well, and we were talking before, and it's interesting. I mean, you had a really good experience over there as someone that's early stage, sort of walking into events and then getting meetings with investors. Do you want to talk a bit about that too?
Yeah, so I guess context, I went for the UN with 36 months to talk about how we could protect adolescents in the digital age, over being a solution for young girls accessing health information. And typically now we're seeing younger girls going to TikTok or Instagram, which is completely, complete misinformation and really dangerous in terms of the algorithms. But I thought what a good opportunity is like an early stage company trying to understand the US landscape, especially a femtech company which has a DEI focus as well, so a B2C and B2B2C in the current administration, because I think, we hear a lot over in Australia, but I really want to get my feet on the ground and just understand what was going on. And it was the best thing I did because I set up a bunch of investor meetings just to understand the competitor landscape, to gauge interest. And, in the early stage, everyone says, get ready for US investors. It's so different to Australia. You're going to be, you're going to have no idea what's hit you. It's honestly the opposite. I got there, I was welcomed, I was invited to events to meet, different grants and different investors and really included, I was in New York, so included into that ecosystem and validated that Ovum really was attacking white space, even in the US. And I've built this in Australia. In total, I've raised 1.8 million, so not 100 million,
Not
which...
yet.
Not, not yet. Maybe at some point. But I think it just comes back to Silk's point, which is like you can create a globally impactful AI company in Australia that is doing something that is not being done in the US without raising $100 million. And it was just, I think it was just, yeah, it was really validating going over and having that experience, and also speaking to industry leaders in women's health that were working some of the biggest hospitals like Northwell, and saying there is nothing like this, and we want this over here. And like Life Science New York being like, we would give you some non-dilute funding to come over here. So I think maybe the US is kind of also seen, especially for early stages, like this kind of big, scary place where investors are just going to shoo you away because you're not a US company. But I think if you're creating something that is game-changing and is attacking this white space and is really unique, you will be recognised, even if you are coming from Australia and you are small and you haven't raised a lot of capital. So I think that's just kind of that positive side. And also just wanted to say, you touched on something I think is really important as well. I don't think, this has been my personal experience, there is benefit in just getting a big, large chunk of money. I think there is benefit in getting the right amount of money that you need to get to that next milestone, not giving a shit ton of equity, sorry, so I've said that, a lot of equity away, and kind of going bit by bit and learning, understanding your customer, understanding your product, and really growing and iterating. And that's what each phase should be about, rather than, I think, just getting a big, large check and doing whatever you want with it. Would be my take.
Okay, I'm going to move to one last question for the founders, and then we will have just a couple of minutes if we've got any questions from the audience, so get ready. So the last question is to the three of you. When you look at the scale of global competition, what gives you the confidence that your company can win? We'll start with you, Jackie.
So, I mean, we're winning. Like we're competing against Salesforce with their Agent Force, Google with their what do they call it, Agent Space. We're competing against not only US companies, but hybrid Lindy.ai, which is I think they raised 40 million or something like that. We're going head to head against these companies, and we're winning consistently. So that's why I very much have the confidence that we can do it, and it's really coming down to what's kind of your, and what differentiates us. I think maybe speaking more Australian type, what differentiates us to some of these other US companies is that we're just a lot more. We have the benefit of being away from the bubble, where that you kind of have to be very truth seeking, because when you're in the bubble, it's very contagious. It becomes a bit of a group think, where it's one, I don't know, let's just say $1 billion founder says I don't know, agents with images is the next big thing. Everyone else around him, and including SF, will now start saying that. So it's very much groupthink. Whereas if you're away from that bubble, you kind of, get to step away and think for yourself a bit more. Now, the benefit we have is that we have both. Well, we have an office space there, so we still get the group thing and seeing what's the trend. But yeah, no, I think there's a lot of factors. Australian talent is really, really great. Thanks to the Canva and the Atlassian, we have talent that if it weren't for them, that has done it, that has scaled it, and that's actually a really critical differentiator between Australia to a lot of other countries, is that there is some countries that don't have that tech experience of 1 to however many daily active users Canva has. I think it's 700 million or something like that. Sorry, Cliff, if I botched the number, but and yeah, the fact that there are engineers, there are product leaders that have done that, that's really, really important, because then you can avoid doing that mistake. And that's one of the great things about SF, is that they have, you go down the road and there's probably 5 people. Let's say you walk past 100 people. There's probably already 50% of that who's gone through that scaling journey. So just things like that will really help the ecosystem compound and get into escape velocity. Now, I do want to be truth-seeking that I still, even though I believe we have competed in the global stage and that we are winning, I do think we're still I guess we're still waiting for that escape velocity growth company. like a lot of, like including ourselves, Heidi Health, even Canva to a certain extent, like it's not like, it hasn't been like, actually excluding Canva, I think Canva is the closest one to escape velocity, but there hasn't been like the overnight sensation story that some of these other countries have had, like Sweden with like Lovable, etc. So I'm looking forward to that happening, and I think it could be us, but who knows? And I think, once we see that, we're going to see a lot more, even more startups being created, because whenever those escape velocity happens, it has been really great for the country's ecosystem and boosting everyone up. So yeah.
So I think from my perspective, for us, it's really, there's a lot of different things which have came into the formula for Aparte, but it's really the fact that we've had this. Australia is an incubator for our company, really. We've had, that support that I mentioned before from government. The reference clients that we've got to start with, CBA and TPG Telecom, which operate the Vodafone network within Australia, were both, key clients and key partners, which really forged our product and made us into, a product which is so, which is ready to go in any network, any bank, any law enforcement agency overseas. And so, some of my colleagues are here, but I won't call them out or anything. But their job is very, very easy in terms of our sales process, because all of our interest is inbound at the moment. We've got the biggest networks coming to us about what we're doing. We've got the biggest banks in the world coming to talk to us about what we're doing and how they can deploy to protect their customers. And I think it's because it's not only had, I suppose, that validation through our first customers here, but it's also the fact that what we're doing is so novel, and it's dealing with a problem which everyone, it's at the heart of any individual, right? Everyone gets a scam call. Everyone knows a story about someone losing their life savings, or their grandma or granddad getting conned by scammers. So for us, we've found that that incubation and I suppose that process to be really, really incredible for us. What we're seeing now and where we're at is, we've got all of this interest. It's really capitalising on that and making sure we really nail and really deploy at scale now with the rest of the telcos that we're working with globally, which I think is fantastic for a little Australian company which has only been around for a couple of years.
So for me, I look at Ovum and I think there's three things that will, I guess, lend to our defensibility. So there's the technology, there's the brand, and honestly, it's my role as a founder. So from the technology, we've been fortunate, as I said, to be first to market in what we're doing in the way we're integrating women's health data across their lifespan, integrating medical reports, integrating wearables, lifespan data and reproductive health data. If you look at femtech, most products are very focused on reproductive health, usually having a very vertical approach rather than a horizontal approach. And along this journey, when I first was speaking to investors, I was actually told time and time again, go vertical, go vertical. And I was like, nope, I'm going horizontal. And actually it's lended to Ovum really standing out now on the global stage. And then I'd say from brands, so actually what we're doing at Ovum is really transforming how health tech and femtech is being perceived. So for so long, women's health companies have been really focused on this kind of reproductive, really juvenile approach to women's health. And actually women's health is so much more than that. Actually, when we look at the gender health gap, 47% of conditions that are contributing to that gap are not reproductive. Only 5% are. 47% includes autoimmune conditions, neurological conditions, mental health, musculoskeletal, but yet all the femtech products do not focus on that. And so we are running Ovum actually like a fashion brand. So we do quarterly campaigns, we're doing publications, we're partnering with fashion brands with gift card suites, so brands can actually gift women their health when doing a purchase, making it something tangible, aspirational, positive and not childish. Which I think is a really unique way of doing things. And we've been contacted by people from overseas because they've seen our branding, large organisations with millions of users who are wanting to partner with us for brand association. And then thirdly is there, in terms of what Ovum is offering, it is something really personal. There's a lot of emotion that's, gone into the product, but also the women who are using it. So for us, we've been able to create emotional resonance with our users, which is not something that you can buy, because I've been front-facing with my own story. I've created a space and a community for women to come to me and be open with their stories, feel they can trust me and therefore trust my company and my brand and choose Ovum over many other wellness apps and femtech products.
Excellent, thank you. And you know how I said we had time for questions? Well, we don't. I'm very sorry about that, but hopefully the speakers can be around for a few minutes to answer any questions you have. The bar, I think, is now open, so thank you very much, guys. Thanks, everyone, for coming. And, yeah, if you want a drink, I go to the bar.
Thank you.